Hello and welcome to today's segment of Rock Your Block. I'm your host, Tia Young, and our co-host today is Ruth Pegaron, certified celebrant and consultant for Lay to Rest. Our guest is the development manager at the Bethany House of Northern Virginia, a faith-based organization that helps women and children who are fleeing from severe cases of domestic abuse. She holds a bachelor's degree in education, a master's degree in educational administration and supervision, and postgraduate studies at Columbia and Georgetown Universities. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Florence Dennis-Huskin to Rock Your Block. Florence, hi.
Hello, how are you doing today, Tia? Just fine, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
It's a pleasure.
And Ruth, thank you.
You're welcome.
For
Thank
taking
you.
away from your busy schedule today to come and co-host.
Thank you, Tia. Glad to be here.
Good. Well, we have a lot to talk about today, so we're going to get started. Florence, what is Bethany House of Northern Virginia, and what is your primary mission?
Very good. Bethany House of Northern Virginia is a nonprofit organization that is faith-based, which is very important to us. So it's a Christian ministry, and our mission is very straightforward. Our mission is to be able to support in any way we can those women and children who find themselves in a situation where they must flee for their lives and find something other than the current housing arrangement in which they are now living. And so our goal is to provide that resting place, that respite, that refuge, you might call it, that sanctuary in which a woman with her child, often coming to us under cover of night, can know that they will be in a place where they will not be disturbed, where they will find some peace. And working with them, which I'll describe later, we're able to provide exactly that environment in which they will be able to flourish and regain that sense of dignity.
Yes. Florence, when you said the word flee, chills just went through me, just to think that there are situations in where women, that's what they have to do, they have to flee for their lives.
And literally, they're making a hard decision to leave the comforts of home and to decide for themselves that safety trumps their discomfort. Or put another way, they'd rather go to another place where they can be assured safety. It may not be the home to which they're accustomed, but we at Bethany make it our business to make it homely.
Yes, wonderful, that's good.
So, where are the administrative offices located for Bethany House?
Our administrative office is located in Alexandria, Virginia, and the exact address would be 6601 Little River Turnpike, Alexandria, Virginia, and the suite 110.
Okay. And Florence, I know you just joined Bethany House and you have an exciting story as it relates to your career and what you've done before Bethany House. However, why don't you tell us a little bit about what made you join Bethany House and what's your role there?
Well, my role is that of the development manager, but I feel that my going to Bethany was God ordained, and I'll say that very seriously because there was pulling at my heart for a long time to be involved in ministry of some kind. And it was very clear, having just finished one assignment that he gave me, working with a local church that was an Episcopal church, that the next assignment he had me was clear cut. And so I just decided to align myself with his will and to work in whatever capacity he wanted me. And it just so happened that Bethany needed a development manager, someone who had a combination of skills in the area of development and fundraising, which I have, but also someone who was empathetic and would be able to write the proposals and grants in such a way as to appeal to the community, to be of great assistance to us, because without funding, Bethany cannot exist and we cannot respond to the dire need of these women and their children.
Right, that's right.
Right. So it sounds like your skills, your background, and your heart fit well into this role.
Yes, and what's interesting is that I had done a lot of development work in the past, working with the Development Department of International Student House in New York, and then being on the board of directors of International Student House in Washington, D.C., but serving as a fundraising and grants liaison.
Right.
But then working at Howard University Office of Research and Development, working at the United Nations, fundraising for earthquake victims and also individuals from Ethiopia who had experienced great degrees of poverty, you might say, on account of the famines that occurred in the 1980s.
Oh, got it.
Florence, I know that you deal with domestic abuse and violence every day. And the question that I have in my mind, is there a difference between domestic abuse and domestic violence?
In my opinion, there is, because I think it's a matter of degree. Domestic abuse, in my personal opinion, would involve those things such as belittling an individual, perhaps stalking, maybe sexual abuse, certainly psychological abuse, emotional abuse. All of those things, in my opinion, fall under the umbrella of domestic abuse. However, there is an assumption that this is done on the basis of intimate partner relationships, and it's a far broader field, in my opinion, because it's a matter of who's in the household. As a result, you have to expand that understanding to not only be domestic partners, but also elder abuse occurs in the household, and child abuse occurs in the household, and is the domestic. It may not be in terms of intimate relationship, but it is just as bad as the traditional understanding of domestic abuse. So again, it's a matter of scale. Unfortunately, things of the nature that I've just described tend to escalate to become domestic violence, unfortunately. And so you're dealing now with a whole other level of abuse. And my understanding from various groups that I speak with and individuals I've spoken with is that that often begins slowly, but it escalates pretty quickly, literally on a dime. And so as they describe it to me, it might be a matter of having gone from being belittled, and embarrassed in company and so forth, to something more like, as they describe it to me, choking, strangling, being shot, and many of those situations, unfortunately, end up in homicide.
Ruth, do you have a follow-up question?
No, I would just like to ask, do you find it in both genders of the abuse or the violence? Is it both against male and female? Okay.
It definitely is. Now, the two ways of answering this. On one hand, it's 1 out of 3 women from our reports that are victims of domestic violence, 1 in 7 men. So maybe about half as many men than women, but the fact of the matter is domestic abuse to anyone or domestic violence to anyone. We're humans, and it is as bad with one gender as it is to another. People should not treat each other, in that manner. They don't have a right. And I would say this: it's very important at some point in time that even though the counties offer training at the younger levels, as in high school, I understand, with regard to an awareness of domestic violence, I think that at some point in time it might be nice for Bethany to consider getting into that fray, because we want to stop it from both ends.
Right.
Yes, that's true. Florence, tell us about some of your previous job assignments that would prepare you, or that have prepared you for the job that you do now.
Okay, because my job at this time as development manager is really multifaceted, I'd have to respond that way. And first of all, from the technical standpoint, I've been trained in the area of development and fundraising, and had the jobs that I mentioned earlier that involved a lot of fundraising and development. However, I found, among other things, it was very important to affiliate myself with the Support Center of Washington, D.C. and the Foundation Center of Washington, D.C. to earn my chops, so to speak, and really get into the technical aspects of how to go about our grantsmanship. That was done many, many years ago, and I was able to build on that and raise funds at different organizations. So as for preparation, that is there. But it takes other things. It takes also an awareness of the issue, and I've made it my business to really study. I've also had friends and relatives who have been victims of domestic abuse. It only takes 1 or 2 conversations with them for you to realize that, but for the grace of God, it could be me or it could be someone very close to me. And then, on the other hand, the compassion that comes across in the course of one's life, of having lived life, combined with my role at various churches as a deacon and Eucharistic minister. When a deacon, I was responsible for 10 families at a time. And so there were indications here and there of domestic abuse or things that needed our attention. And so
Right.
later on I will talk about how important it is to be tuned into your friends and family or people under your care in church or any organization of which you are a part, because you might be able to make a difference in their lives.
Right.
So essentially the training, the experience, but also the gift of discernment that comes about by wanting to, as a deacon, be a servant leader.
Right. So in the church, did you get special training in the church to
Not
help you
with
do
the
this?
church
or-
where I was a deacon, but it's interesting, in the church where I'm a Eucharistic minister, they've had some wonderful preliminary programs that you had to go through to understand what is sexual abuse so that you could be qualified to work among the children.
Oh, okay. All right, good.
In your current role, do you get the opportunity to, I know you said that you're a part of Foundation Center and the grantmanship and the fundraising, so that's more, I get the development side.
Correct.
But to show some of that compassion and to be able to express some of your heartfelt skills or characteristics, do you get the opportunity at Bethany House to interact with the participants? And
I've had the pleasure to interact
Okay.
with a few, but my role is so clearly defined over there that we actually have experts who happen to be counselors trained specifically in how to handle the needs of these ladies and their children. And the person in particular that I speak of, we've got a counselor, we have also a case manager. So between the two of them, they are actually the first contact with our visitors who then become our clients if they're deemed eligible. And my involvement is peripheral, but I sometimes go to the safe house. Sometimes I'm checking along with someone else on issues like IT issues, but it might be an opportunity then to interact with those who are at the house at that time.
Are there special things that you have to do? Because I'm thinking it's got to be traumatic for children who are coming in situations, and even though things are bad at home, home is home, and now you're pulled from home into another total environment.
It is
that
very,
tough?
very difficult for children, and our concern is that the environment we create, which is such a nurturing one, is one where the children are also cared for psychologically and emotionally and in other ways. What I like about the Bethany program, and this distinguishes Bethany from some of the other programs available, is that we offer a 4-month program, unlike others which provide only 30 days and at most 45. And so the children's care is considered in that time frame. And I will get into it at some point, but I think I should just hit a couple of highlights. You have the intake, based on their having been deemed qualified or eligible. Discussions, of course, with the counselor. A plan of action, which is an individual service plan.
Right.
So after that, there's also, I would say, a couple of other things come to my mind, but advocacy takes place. There's a women's empowerment element, and the
That's
children
good.
too
That's right.
get an opportunity
That gives-
to
okay.
be taken care of from a psychological and emotional standpoint. Research is saying that many of those children who've experienced it themselves, unfortunately, might perpetuate that type of behavior
Right.
if it is not caught early and dealt with soon.
Understood. We are going to take a short station break. We will return after these important messages, so don't touch that dial.
When I look in the mirror,
Do I like what I see?
yes. I like my teeth and I like my tongue. I like my nose. I like my ears.
And my eyes?
And I like my face. Me gusta todo.
I see a perfect reflection of me.
And I wouldn't change a single thing.
Because I am enough.
Welcome back. You're watching Rock Your Block, featuring our special guest, Florence Dennis-Huskin, Development Manager at Bethany House of Northern Virginia. Ruth, you're up.
well, welcome back again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth.
I would like to ask, I hear an accent. So where are you from?
I'm born in France.
Okay.
To diplomatic parents, so each one of us children was born in a different country.
Oh, wonderful. So do you have a lot of international travel
Quite
now?
a bit,
Okay.
because their work literally took them to the four corners of the earth. And so a lot of my performative years were spent here as well as Great Britain. And then later on, they traveled to such countries as Ivory Coast, and they were also in Eastern Europe. So I've done quite a few countries in my time, but then as I developed my career and worked in for quite a while the international development arena, I volunteered to work several summers in Senegal with the Ministry for Women, Children, and the Family. And so there are many issues that were being examined at that time, safety issues, of course, to a smaller degree, domestic violence, but we were encouraging some of the market ladies and others to be self-sufficient in a different way, and that was to take advantage of microloans that were available to them.
Oh, wow. So in that international travel, how would you compare abuse in your experience? Could be specifically with Bethany House focuses on, which is more the women's side. How would you compare how we handle it here in the United States versus in some of the other countries that you've experienced?
Well, the statistics are really interesting. You've got the actual statistics and the reported statistics, and they don't necessarily converge.
Right, a little bit different.
Yes,
right?
there is a difference, but in terms of what's reported, we know that 1 in 3 ladies are affected, 1 in 7 men. We know that a fact, but it translates to 10 million people in the United States, which is really unfortunate. That impacts a lot of things, the families, also the community, and then you're breaking down the foundation of the country if your basic building blocks are decimated, as they are. So the advantage, you might say, of the U.S., where this issue is concerned, is that laws are on the books that are taken seriously with regard to assault and battery and other things, and stalking. Those types of laws do not necessarily exist everywhere in the world. And unfortunately, we've got these statistics I mentioned for the U.S., but in Europe it is said approximately 30% in most of those Northern European countries of those women are affected. And then increasingly, it's something like 50% in some parts of Africa. As you go towards Asia, I'm sorry to say, but specifically India and Pakistan, it shoots up to 80% and 90%.
Wow, that's significant.
It is. And
Does the
culturally,
economic situation have anything to do with that?
it's
or
largely, it could be partly economic because that is a trigger for some people. But in addition to that, there's also cultural overtones. And if you include in that 80 or 90% in that part of the world, it includes the honor killings, where if a young lady chooses not to marry the person the family's chosen, or if there's something similar along those lines, it might be that it is felt the father and the sons, or her brother, so to speak, need to do the honorable thing and stamp her out, is how it's perceived.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that was
Which is
still
so
happening.
unfortunate.
Yeah, I didn't know that was still happening. I'd heard of that, but
It
I
is
thought
still
that
happening.
going back
And
centuries.
certain parts of the world, it's very difficult for a young lady to take a bus to go to, you've heard the case, a movie. And come back home safely.
Yes, yes.
She might be assaulted on a bus.
Is that because she's not with a male?
She was with a male. And she was with her male
that's
friend.
Right. That's right. I do remember
And
that.
so they attacked him first and then her. And in any society that believes that women are less than, then the guilt factor does not necessarily exist. It's like, so what? And that's really unfortunate. And so it is our duty, this generation, wherever we are in the world, to re-educate people as to the value, of other people.
Right.
And for women who are affected to realize that they are precious in God's sight and they are not to be treated any which way.
That's right. I agree with that 100%.
That's a good statement.
Florence, you recently gave a mother's testimony at a local church. Can you summarize that mother's testimony, her short testimony for our viewers?
I'd be happy to. Bethany, because of the work that we do, has many opportunities to speak to individuals with regard to their situation, and we keep everything very confidential, of course. But in essence, this is what I'm familiar with. There was a mother who herself, years ago, had been affected by domestic violence, very badly so. And somehow, because this issue is sometimes intergenerational and multi-generational, her daughter was also affected very badly by her significant other. So much so she was unable to really care for her young child. And so she went to her mother, and her mother said, I know what to do. Call a church. Let's see what can be done. The church, in turn, decided that they'd rather have them go to Bethany House because of the long-term opportunities for safe housing that we offered. And so the young lady, meaning the daughter, joined Bethany House, went through our procedures of speaking with our counselors on a regular basis. I'm sure the child had some interventions too. But long story short is after a 4-month period, all of the dreams and aspirations that the daughter once had were revived, and she was ready to face the world. She had new skills that were acquired, and I'll just throw in that part of the need to raise funds is that we need to help people who'd like to get retrained in something if they'd like that. And so she got retrained, was able to relaunch her career, relaunch her life, and our understanding is that she's doing very well indeed. It is our hope, however, that her daughter, having seen what she, meaning what is now the granddaughter, does not, having had an experience of witnessing domestic abuse, we hope that this does not repeat itself in her generation.
Right. Now, when you say retrain, does that mean that you're teaching them a skill set from start to finish?
There are individuals who, when they sit down with a counselor, develop their own individualized plan. It's almost a game plan or an action plan. And so for some people, because we have people from all economic levels and all ethnicities, and all religious backgrounds, some already are highly marketable, some are not. And for those that are not, that we want to launch back into the workforce, to use an example, it might be that they get office skills training, and there are organizations that we hope will partner with us soon to do that type of work. There's one lady who graduated recently with her CNA certification, and a little team from Bethany went to support her at the graduation. And so you have different scenarios, but yes, it takes money to make that training happen.
Okay. And speaking of money, what about fundraising? Because I hear a lot of nonprofit organizations are having a time, trying to raise money.
Yes, and this is sometimes the case when there's an economic downturn, but it's also a challenge that we embrace warmly, because if we don't raise the funds necessary to have houses available or apartments available to secure these women and to guarantee their safety, to return them to the perpetrator is a sure death for several people. And we cannot, in our right mind, and with the mission before us, allow that to happen. And so, yes, it is a challenge, but it's one we embrace, and we think that working steadily with our community members and explaining through advocacy and through exposure to what really is domestic violence, that there might be a raising of the consciousness of our corporations, of our clubs, of our churches and individuals, because after all, they have opportunity to make tax deductible contributions to Bethany. So it's a win-win situation, but most importantly, they're actually saving lives.
That's right.
Yes,
That's right.
yes.
That's very right. It's good.
Yes, and I can hear your passion about saving lives, and that leads me to my next question. Did some of that help you make your decision of why you joined Bethany?
Oh, most definitely, because, in the roles that I have been in the past, and the larger role that I see in the future, larger in the sense that an expanded version of what I'm doing now, it's all about preparation. And so in preparing through other situations to work at Bethany, I feel I'm at the right place. But I just encourage the community at large, to join us hand in hand in partnership so that we can support these ladies. It takes a whole $25,000 to support one lady and her child or two in the 4-month period.
For 4 months.
And it sounds large to some people, but you're talking housing. You're talking about skilled counselors, of which is several. You're talking about transportation back and forth to secure them where they need to go, or to pick them up, in whatever part of town they happen to be in. And then aftercare, the fact that we've got that 2 additional years in which we stay in touch. It might be that we had to pay for their transitional housing Or it might be that we had to put the down payment in that safe apartment that's now their own home.
Right.
But it takes funds. So the commitment is there. We've got an extraordinary executive director, Olga Johnson, a wonderful president of the board, Brad Wollman, and staff that is very sacrificial, volunteers that are extraordinary and give up a lot of their free time to work on what needs to be done at Bethany. But the key thing is financial support.
Support, right. I have a question. This is just by way of an example. Let's just say I'm someone and I call in, I'm desperate, I've got to get out of my house, I got to flee, as you said earlier. What is an intake? What is entailed in that? When I call that hotline number and I reach you, what kind of steps am I going to have to take in order to find a place that night
Very
to
good.
get in?
Well, the first thing is those receiving that call would be the counselor and or the case manager. And we even have one or two people lately who assist in that regard. But they would need to carefully evaluate over the telephone the degree to which this is a dire situation. And based on availability of housing, if we have a room or so, then it might be that you're asked to remain where you are and someone will pick you up, or you're given an address to which you need to show up and be taken whisked off very quickly to one of our safe houses. But it's a matter of they're asking strategic questions to determine, who's really eligible at that point in time. If you're eligible at that point in time, clearly a day or two you need to decompress. But then there's a series of meetings with the counselors, and they in turn will begin to go through that family assistance program I mentioned, where counseling is first, assessing your goals and your objectives, making sure you get trauma recovery, and then towards the end, making sure that that should you need support from us, even if it's a matter of coming by the office and picking up some cans of food or some diapers for your child, that our relationship continues.
You're there. Do you have a hotline number that
We
you could
do
share?
have a hotline number.
What is that hotline
and I'd be
number?
happy to share that with you. The hotline number would be 703-658-9500.
Okay, that should be scrolling on our screen. Thank you so much, Florence. It's just been a pleasure.
Likewise, it's been a real pleasure.
You got to come back.
I will certainly do
because
that.
we just touched the surface.
We certainly did, and it's been a pleasure to be with both of you here today.
Thank you, Ruth, as well.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching our show today, and we welcome Florence Dennis-Huskin to come back and share more information about domestic abuse and domestic violence. Domestic abuse and violence against women, children, and men is not acceptable, ever. Just so we are all on the same page, the Center for Family Justice characterizes domestic abuse and violent activities under 5 areas known. The first one is physical abuse. The second one is emotional, psychological abuse. The third one, economic and financial abuse. 4, stalking and harassment. And 5, sexual abuse. If you need help, the National Domestic Abuse Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. This number is flashing on your screen below. Thank you for watching Rock Your Block, and we look forward to seeing you next week for another great show. Bye-bye.